want to share with you this morning the connection of the prodigal son, John Newton, and the song that he wrote, Amazing Grace. Now, Sarah just read the first parable and the second parable. The prodigal son is the third parable that you find in chapter 15 of Luke. It's the only place you can find it in the Bible. This was stories told by Jesus over 2,000 years ago. So first I want to read the parable of the prodigal son, which is also known the parable of the lost son. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me." And he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. And when he had spent everything, he began to be in need. And he went and attached himself to one of the citizens of that country. And he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he was longing to fill his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating. No one was giving him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I'm dying of hunger? I will go to my father and will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me your hired hand.' And he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Kill the fatted calf. My son was dead and is alive. My son was lost and is found. Let us eat and be merry.' And when the older son heard music, he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things might be. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come and your father has killed the fatted calf.' But the older son became angry and was not willing to go in. His father came out and began entreating him. The older son said to his father, 'Look, I have always slaved for you. I have never disobeyed your orders. You never even gave me a goat that I might be merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And the father said, 'My child, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. We need to rejoice. Your brother was lost and is found.'" So first I want to talk about the prodigal son. And the prodigal son is saying to his father, "Father, I cannot wait for you to die. I want my inheritance now." So what does this say about the prodigal son? Maybe a little immature, rebellious, certainly irresponsible, doesn't seem to have any obligation in helping his father take care of the estate. I'm sure he and his older brother do not get along, and the servants probably do not hold him in high regard. But the father divides his estate. So what does this say about the father? Well, he's certainly generous, probably loving, forgiving, and I'm sure that he is sad that his son has taken this position. And then the Bible says that the prodigal son gathers all his belongings and heads to a far distant land. He soon loses everything he has and goes to work for a family raising pigs. Now, the pigs are significant. Jews feel that pigs are unclean. They're not even allowed to touch pigs. So if it's a family raising pigs, we know it's not a Jewish family. It has to be a Gentile family. Well, this is significant. Jews are a proud people. They know they are the chosen ones. They have a tendency to look down on Gentiles. So for the son of a rich Jewish landowner to be working for a Gentile family, right away we know something is wrong. This would not normally happen. And to make matters worse, he's not only feeding the pigs, he's eating with the pigs. So this tells us that the prodigal son has hit bottom. And then the Bible says that the prodigal son finally comes to his senses. He says something like, "Hey, this is crazy. What am I doing here? My father's servants are treated better than I am. I'm going home." Now, it doesn't say he has a feeling of guilt or a sense of obligation. Oh, he's sorry. He's sorry he's got himself into this situation. But we can relate this to modern day. How many times have we heard about someone who had been doing something that they shouldn't, but everything was fine until they got caught? Then all of a sudden they're sorry. Then all of a sudden they're apologizing. And so now the prodigal son is heading home, working on a story, hoping to get back in his father's good graces. And then the Bible says that the father sees him at a far distance. Well, this is significant. No one sees him but the father. So this tells us that the father's probably out there every day looking, searching, hoping, praying that his son will come home. And when he sees him, he runs to greet him. But this is also significant. Elderly Jewish men did not run. They were way too dignified. They would not pull up that tunic and run in their sandals. But the father's so excited, he runs to greet his son, throws his arms around him, and gives him a kiss. But meanwhile, the prodigal son is saying, Father, I have sinned against heaven. I have sinned against you. But the father's not paying any attention to his son. He's so excited. He says to the servants, my son was dead and is alive. My son was lost and is found. Kill the fatted calf. Now, not just any calf, the perfect calf, the same calf that would have been used as a blood sacrifice. And then the father says, put the best robe on him. Well, who's the best robe belong to? The father's the head of the household. So what he's saying is, put my best robe on him. And then he says, put a ring on his finger. Well, the ring is significant. We all know the meaning of a ring in marriage. Love, honor, cherish, obey, commitment. The ring goes all the way back to the days of Moses. In the Jewish book of Common Prayers, written in 1622, it says, with this ring I consecrate you according to the law of Moses. And I looked up the word consecrate. What does consecrate mean? It means sacred. It means holy. It means eternal. And then the father says, put sandals on his feet. Well, the sandals are significant. Slaves and servants did not wear sandals. Only members of the family wore sandals. So what's the father saying to his son? He's saying you are being totally reinstated into the family. No ifs, ands, and buts. No contingencies. It's so it never happened. But let's look at the oldest son. The oldest son represents the Pharisees. The oldest son is a sinner who thinks he's a saint. The oldest son has compared himself to his younger brother. Well, we all have a tendency to do this sometime, compare ourselves to others who may not quite meet our standards. And then the oldest son says, Father, you never even gave me a goat. So what's he really saying? He's saying, Father, you don't appreciate me. You are not treating me fairly. Well, we've all felt this way at one time or another. And then the oldest son says, Father, I have always slaved for you. I have never disobeyed your orders. Well, I don't think being the eldest son of a rich Jewish landowner is much of a sacrifice. And as far as never disobeying his father's orders, have we ever known any son who has never disobeyed his father's orders, with the exception of Jesus Christ? Well, let's look at it from the oldest son's point of view. How would we feel if our younger brother, who we thought was a brat, took all his inheritance, left home, soon came back, busted, broke, and wanted to be reinstated into the family? Would we be like the older brother, or would we be like the loving father? Charles Dickens, the most famous writer to ever come out of England, he was born in London, 1812. He probably wrote more classics than any writer ever. Just to name a few: David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, Christmas Carol. We all know Christmas Carol. It comes on TV every year. All the little kids know who Mr. Scrooge is. Charles Dickens was not only the most read writer in England at that time, he was the most read writer in the world. He would come over to America, fill up auditoriums. People would pay top dollar just to see him in person and hear him read his books that they probably already read. And the reason I mention Charles Dickens, because Charles Dickens said, and I quote, "The prodigal son is the greatest story ever told." Rembrandt, one of the most famous artists to ever live, his paintings sell for millions and millions and millions. He was Dutch, born 1606. That's known as the golden era of the Dutch. In his youth, he was somewhat wild, reckless, arrogant. he painted two paintings of the prodigal son. The first one when he was rather young. And in this painting, he portrayed himself as the son being accepted by the loving, gracious father. The name of this painting was The Wandering Son. The second painting he painted later in life, a few years before he died. In this painting, he was not the sinner. He was the loving, gracious father accepting the son. This is one of the most famous paintings in the world. The name of the painting is The Return of the Prodigal. And you can see it today. It's located in the Hermitage Museum of Art, which is the largest art museum in the world, over 3 million pieces of art. It was started in 1764 by Catherine the Great, opened to the public in 1852, and it's located in St. Petersburg, Russia. Let's talk about John Newton and the song that he wrote, Amazing Grace. John Newton was also born in London, July 24, 1725. His father was a merchant seaman, so his father was gone practically all the time. He was raised by his mother. His mother taught him to read the Bible, taught him to memorize Bible verses, taught him to sing and memorize hymns. She told him Bible stories over and over. She was very active in church. She took him everywhere she went. He was a mama's boy, and I'm sure those were the happiest days of his life. Unfortunately, though, John Newton's mother died right before his 7th birthday. He was devastated. His father put him into a boarding school. He was still grieving. He became uncooperative, rebellious. He ran away. His father didn't know what to do with him, so he took him out to sea. So John Newton was raised at sea with a bunch of hardened seamen, and he became just as hard as they were. At age 16, he joined the English Navy, and he became just as rude and crude as any sailor sailing the 7 seas. In a letter that he later wrote, he said by age 17 he had forgotten everything his mother had ever taught him, that his desire and passion in life was wickedness, that he would not be in the company of someone for an hour without trying to corrupt their character. He was truly a wretch. If you look up the word wretch in the dictionary, that's about the worst name you can call someone. He was so bad, at one time he tried to kill the captain of the ship. In addition to that, he loved to mock God, defy God, even cuss God. At age 18, he went AWOL. He ended up on an island with a family that had no regard for him whatsoever. They treated him like a dog. In fact, the biography says they fed him scraps from the table with the dogs. Finally, after a couple of years, he was able to escape. He caught a ride on a slave ship, and that's how he got involved in the slave trade business. He felt like he had finally found a home. But during the 4th year, the ship he was on encountered a horrible storm, and for 16 hours, the entire crew was fighting, trying to survive. For 9 straight hours, John Newton was manning the pump, trying to keep the ship from sinking. And after 9 hours, the captain sent him below to fetch a knife. The man who took his place was immediately swept overboard. John Newton knew that should have been him. That was the second time in less than a month his life had been spared. A few weeks earlier, he got so drunk he fell off the ship, and it was just a miracle that he was saved. But after 16 hours, they were able to get the ship ashore, and the next day the storm was much worse. And they all knew if they hadn't got to shore when they did, that none of them would have survived. But it was also during these 16 hours when John Newton was fighting for his life, when he was struggling to survive, he felt like an atheist in a foxhole. And after defying God, mocking God, even cussing God, John Newton cried out to God, God, please have mercy on us. And all of a sudden, John Newton began to change. He got down on his knees and started to pray to God. He started remembering the Bible stories his mother told him over and over and over. And after the storm was over and things settled back to normal, John Newton had a craving to read the Bible. He had a craving for the Word. And by some strange coincidence, there's a Bible on the ship that has survived the storm. And as John Newton's thumbing through the Bible, the first story he comes on is the prodigal son. And he reads it over and over and over. And he remembers it's a story that his mother used to tell him. But he really had a heart for Paul. He couldn't get enough of Paul. He identified with Paul. Paul was his mentor. And you may be interested in knowing that in the New Testament there are 155 references to grace. 130 come from Paul. John